super beneficial to the Biotensegrity archive and to all of our friends who love this sort of stuff just like we do and who just aren't here because they don't know it's happening. Okay. So.
It says on my screen that we're live on YouTube.
Okay, I have to shut my YouTube off because I'm getting feedback.
I hear it.
Okay. So back to Zoom. I will put the, I'm going to put the link here in the chat box so everybody can share that out. And now I will, let's see, Graham, you need to unmute. I'm going to unmute Elizabeth and Rachel. Graham, do you want to start with your introduction while I do a little bit of background work here?
Thank you, Chris. Well, hello and welcome to the BiotensegriTea Tea Party, the fourth of a series of live events that features a different handspring author each week, with your regular hosts, Chris Clancy, Susan Lowell, and myself, Graham Scarr, and our guest host and interviewer for today, Rachel Tudor, who's been active in the embodied Biotensegrity courses run by Chris Clancy, and most important of all, our handspring author, Elizabeth Larkam. These tea parties are sponsored by the Stephen Levin Biotensegrity Archive, Embodied Biotensegrity, and Handspring Publishing. And for those of you watching live on the YouTube channel, please note that Handspring are offering a generous discount on the price of their books to those registered for the Biotensegrity Archive newsletter. If through the course of this you have any questions to ask Elizabeth, please put them into the chat box, or if you're watching on Zoom, on the comment section, if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll try and monitor them and bring them out later on. So, Elizabeth Larkam.
Before that, I'm sorry, Graham. Can we toast?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Everybody, thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yes, everyone's coming up. Good, splendid. Right, Elizabeth Larkam, a national certified Pilates teacher, Feldenkrais practitioner, and a gyrotonic and gyrokinesis instructor. Elizabeth authored the book Fascia in Motion, Fascia-Focused Movement for Pilates, published by Handspring in 2017, and the Pilates chapter for Fascia in Sport and Movement in 2015, and a second edition in 2020. She is co-editor of Pilates Applications for Health Conditions, Case Reports and Perspectives, to be published by Handspring in 2021. Elizabeth is a pioneer of the Pilates Method Alliance initiative, Heroes in Motion. She was awarded the Medal of the Danish Society of Military Medicine in recognition of her efforts to improve the rehabilitation of wounded soldiers. As a dance medicine Pilates specialist at St. Francis Memorial Hospital between 1985 and 2000, Elizabeth created Pilates programs for orthopedic, spine, and chronic pain diagnoses. As director of Pilates and Beyond for Western athletic clubs, she developed the internationally acclaimed Mind and Body Center. She has 48 programs on Pilates Anytime, 8 on fusionpilatesedu.com, and is a balanced body master instructor and mentor. So welcome, Elizabeth, and our host, Rachel Tudor.
Hi, thank you so much. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you today?
So happy to be here, Rachel. It's such an amazing privilege that we can gather from all over the world, and that we have the privilege, the time and the resources to attend to this really important aspect of movement and health, particularly when so much suffering in the world today.
Absolutely, beautifully put. So we thought we might start with just a little bit more about you and I are here together today, why I am interviewing you. The reason for that is that we have a history and a relationship. You are my mentor and my friend, and have had a huge influence on my movement practice. That's in a nutshell, I think, enough about me. And I will throw that over to you if you'd like to add anything to that.
Yes, Rachel, it could be, as usual, no accident that you and I are here together and here on this platform, since you and I may have a similar resonance or a shared interest in being seekers. Seekers in our field is the movement field. We work with clients every day in the studio when we can and online when we cannot. And our seeking has also led us to share this similar interest in interdisciplinary studies. So that brings us together and brings us here.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the first question is, how did you become aware of biotensegrity? And I don't know if within this question, you also might like to speak a bit about Pilates and your start with Pilates.
Yes. Probably the earliest awareness of tensegrity as a word came when I was a senior in high school in Austin, Texas, and then a freshman at Stanford. In those times, I was quite fascinated with yurts, the architecture of Mongolia, Y-U-R-T-S, yurts. And that brought me to the becoming aware of Buckminster Fuller's pioneering work, interdisciplinary work, having to do with geodesic domes. So that's early on, and that was well before I knew about Pilates. I had always been drawn to movement in athletics, but mostly in dance. And when I learned that the Center for Sports Medicine at St. Francis Hospital was starting a dance medicine division in 1985, I went initially as a self-referred client to take care of a knee injury that I had sustained playing soccer when I was 15. From a physical perspective, that knee injury destroyed my confidence in my own structural tensegrity. And so it's as a result of that, that personal experience that I seek feelings of connection or feelings of the balance of tension and compression. Understand, I didn't have this vocabulary then, and I'm still working on the vocabulary now. But that personal movement experience and other experiences, everyone has to have enough therapy to get over themselves. I was invited to become a teacher, an instructor, a Pilates instructor at St. Francis Hospital. This was in the 80s, and I stayed there until 2000. That was a wonderful window of using movement for healing. And we were swimming in the aquarium. We were drinking the Kool-Aid every day of the sports medicine ideas from the 80s. If there was a problem, it was for sure due to strength, you know? And so if you just strengthened the vastus medialis, the knee would be fine. Well, my knee would probably be better if I strengthened the vastus medialis, but not all the way better. So it was in this sports medicine environment where Pilates was used as a healing modality as part of the treatment team of physical therapy, physiatry, orthopedics, etc. That's where I grew up in the study of Pilates. Now, to speak about Pilates, I'm most grateful to the genius of Joseph Pilates, particularly in creating apparatus that enable the mover and the practitioner to customize different vectors, different forces from the movement environment with springs and with cords in order to facilitate what I understand maybe now to be a balance of tension, compression, and other expressions of human movement guided by first principles. Joseph Pilates had a particular cultural and had a particular cultural experience of movement, such that the Pilates method of exercises that he created are primarily in the sagittal plane, more in sagittal flexion, less in sagittal extension, even less in lateral flexion or the coronal plane of side bending, and even less in rotation and combined planes of movement. So that was it was a good place for me to start, and a very good place from which to study and to create. We'll just note that to the Feldenkrais practitioners in the group and the Tai Chi practitioners as well, that Moshe Feldenkrais, yes, perhaps was led to, in part, to discover his method because he had a knee injury from playing soccer too. Now, I mean, I'm not delusional. I'm not just like Moshe, but I just note that sometimes the personal experiences are significant drivers when one seeks function, just as the interdisciplinary study is. Okay, Rachel, I'm sure I've gone off on too many. So
no, I don't think so. I think that was a wonderful and comprehensive answer. And I can say experientially for myself, when I was questioning the movement practice that I was in, the more I started to study fascia and then biotensegrity, your explorations, approaches, innovations were the bridge I needed to bring something that felt more resonant to me. So that's for my own experience. And I'm thinking anyone who works with you or has had the pleasure of learning from you, I'm hoping that's a similar thing for them. So in addition, oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Of course. Then I mentioned the being introduced to Buckminster Fuller's work in the early 70s. It was as a result of studying the literature and the conferences about fascia that introduced me to biotensegrity, and gratefully to Graham Scar's first edition. This is the second edition of his book, but the first edition of this book is what brought the term and Stephen Levin's pioneering work to my attention. So it's not that I'm all fascinated with Pilates. I'm grateful for Pilates, to learn it, to study it, and as a platform for evolution. And I'm very, very grateful for the study of fascia and all the richness that the fascia research field brings. But neither am I all that fascinated about fascia, meaning I don't think that I've found the holy grail with at any time. That the study of fascia and the attending as a learner those conferences leads me to appreciate biotensegrity and to think that my studies of fascia continuing has been a good preparation to lead me to biotensegrity, which is still, you know, a very high mountain to climb, and I don't expect that I will achieve that end, but the process of learning is beneficial.
Absolutely. And I think many of us came to it in a similar progression as well. I think a lot of us got our first toe in the water, potentially through anatomy trains. And I know I did. And ran with it from there, which then leads us into biotensegrity,
Yes.
hopefully, I think for most of us who are here. And this is a great segue into the next question, especially in terms of interdisciplinary exploration. Because in addition to being a Pilates master, you are certified in Feldenkrais, gyrotonic, gyrokinesis, and the Franklin method. You have studied Iyengar and Ashtanga yoga, and your lifetime of movement studies have come together to inform really your creation of a new movement vocabulary. How does this relate to biotensegrity for you?
Yes. Each movement system that we're fortunate enough to immerse in or to experience different kinesthetic and proprioceptive and maybe interoceptive experiences. Each system has its own vocabulary of assumptions. And sometimes those assumptions are stated right out, and sometimes they're explicit, and sometimes they're implicit. When I went back and forth between, say, the Pilates studio and the gyrotonic, well, that too, but the Pilates studio and the Feldenkrais awareness through movement and functional integration platforms, I experienced not only cognitively, but also kinesthetically differences. And so I was trying to square them, trying to put them, how can they be integrated? What's different about them? And I do this with every movement system, questioning it as I grow and experience it. I realize now, in retrospect, and now I'm in the last third of my life, so I better get going if I'm going to get it done this lifetime. But I prefer to be able to ask questions about the underlying assumptions of each movement practice. When I come to the Biotensegrity conferences, the Biotensegrity interest group meetings, and I ask a question I realize now seeking an answer about first principles or something like that, I'm always so heartened that when I ask Graham or Stephen Levin or Leonid, that the answer is fulfilling. So then I think, oh, we must be on the right track here. However, the question still presents itself that how are these first principles, or how are the principles, the models of biotensegrity, and the vocabulary, how is that to be translated into an embodied movement experience that honors the client's architecture, their neuromyofascial system?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I can speak, of course, from my own experience, even as the exploration of fascia and biotensegrity, as I was saying before, kind of led me away from, in a way, the practice I was doing. It left me in a place of, well, now what? What do I do now? Where do I go from here? And I think a lot of movers find themselves in that conundrum, which is where you are a fantastic bridge. And I can say now, from working in your vocabulary for probably 6 or 7 years now, being able to extrapolate from it and in real life situations with real life clients, and all of that, the things that brings, and in myself, just those inquiries, the allowance of all these interdisciplinary things mixing together, it gives you so many more options, possibilities, and ways of helping and healing, where you don't necessarily feel like you have to be in this space, if that makes sense.
Rachel, would now be that this is a genuine question. It's not a leading question. I think leading questions are so rude. It's a genuine would now be a good time for a movement intermission?
Absolutely, I think so, because I think especially the movers, I know myself, are super excited to be speaking to and hearing from a mover and able to really put that into a felt sense experience.
But first, 2 sentences from that would be page 130 in chapter 11 of Graham's book, the last paragraph. And Graham is writing in this case from the standpoint of a manual therapist, from an osteopath, which I am not, but have a huge respect for that system. Treatment is then more than just changing tissue tensions, repairing the structure, or improving mobility, but a process that alters the tissue geometry, changes the architecture, and the body's self-organizing mechanisms then automatically respond to this and establish a new state of dynamic equilibrium as the system moves toward a different state of health. Yeah, now don't get your hopes up, you know. Just don't think that in this move we're going to get it all taken care of. However, this is it's the direction that I think, you know, Graham sets a high bar there, and it's a direction I think that to which we can all aspire. All right, so if you have on slippery socks, take them off, because you need to have your foot on the wall. So go to your mat now, so that you can place one foot on the wall.
Elizabeth, if I can just interrupt 1 second, if we give people a chance to get to their walls, I think, and I highly recommend anybody who can try this do, because it's quite an aha feeling.
Exactly. There's something said for being a voyeur on that side of your screen, but there's a whole other experience if you just get down and do it.
Exactly. I can see some people still heading to their walls here.
That's right.
Let's see. All right, Elizabeth, looks to me like we're good to go now.
All right, so here you are on all 3. Palms wide and fingers spread with hands in line with your shoulders. Whole foot is on the wall, with the idea that your heel on the wall is in line with your sitting bone, the same side sitting bone or ischium. Now, if the proprioception isn't so good, you might need a rear view mirror, but we don't have that at the moment. Okay, so one knee is on the ground. Leave the opposite hand on the ground, and without laterally shifting, lift the other hand off the ground and rotate in the direction of the hand that's on the floor. So you turn in the direction of your floor hand. So this is thoracic rotation, cervical rotation as well. Aim your gaze up to the ceiling. It's as if your eyes could lead you around in rotation. Push your foot into the wall, push your hand into the ground for ground forces, and then put down both hands. So both hands are on the ground. Now the plot thickens. As you inhale, shift on purpose. It's a lateral translation. So the light from your chest bone, the light from your sternum is now shining over the third finger of your, or the middle finger of your hand. Push your foot into the wall. You have a lateral translation. Pick up the other hand and then rotate. So you're turning the lung that belongs to the wall foot, turning that lung in the direction of the hand that's threading the needle through. Push your foot into the wall, press your hand into the floor, and come up. Now, raise your hand if you fell off the wall. No, don't. Okay, now put the other foot up on the wall. And here we have the other side. Take a look at the knee that's on the ground. Leave the other palm on the ground, the opposite hand, so you have a diagonal support. And if one thinks of it differently, maybe you have a triangle of ground forces, your palm, your knee, and your foot on the wall. Without a lateral shift, without translation, and without side bending, do your best for rotation. Aiming your gaze up towards the ceiling above your shoulder. As you exhale, press into the wall, press into your hand. Now, as you inhale, your whole central axis translates so that you are balanced on the same side, hand and knee. And then bending your elbow, pushing your foot into the wall. The lung that belongs to the wall leg is turning away from the wall foot. Come down from here now. And let's hear what your comments are. Graham, would you speak about, do you have any comments about this, Graham?
I got your question. This is completely new to me, what you're doing, because I'm not familiar with exercises at all. It's not what I've ever done. So I'm watching as an interested audience, really. It was very impressive, very interesting to see the slow and carefully considered movement. That's really important in any movement. Is that the sort of feedback? Is that useful at all? Oh, we can't hear you, Elizabeth.
Oh, I got it now. Can you repeat that, Elizabeth? Sorry, you were muted.
Oh, sure, Graham, that was fine. I get it, that's all right. I see that Wilbur has some comments, but I can't read.
Yes, Wilbur has a comment in the chat. What's the purpose of the movement? And along the same lines, we have just curious about what you are trying to work. Is this the diagonal? So I think more, just maybe a bit more discussion about what that movement brings to our attention.
And then another comment also from Wilbur below that. Any clinical implication, impressive move equals precise. I'm not quite sure what he means.
Yeah.
In this move, I was seeking a movement sequence that would require activation of all the myofascial continuities, or as much of the myofascial continuities as I could in this laboratory situation. Let's see. As far as clinical applications goes, Wilbur, no, a bigger, a different overview would be that to my experience, this requires a balance of the continuum of tension and the discontinuum of compression. So I'm seeking for a balance of forces pushing out and pressing in, or push-pull in this way, in this situation. The ability to be able to translate the central axis, or translate the thoracolumbar junction in conjunction, in alignment with the sacrum, in alignment with the occiput, and then to be able to rotate, whether you're in the middle or translated to one side of the kinesphere. I find challenging and interesting, particularly because given the given the different shapes of my legs from the knee injury from when I was age 15, I'm drawn to movement practices that will not destroy my joint tissues further, but will enable me to embody a balance of forces that I cannot reach otherwise. But I'm not sure that this is speaking to people's interest, or just going off on my own tangent.
Can I give you a comment from Anastasi, who says, in sitting post the movements, I feel more length in my spine and easier excursion of my ribs in breathing. I loved it. So there's some positive feedback.
Thank you for that. And when I got that feedback, you probably also got my email. So I don't know, Susan, I need some help here. The screen just...
No, we're all good, Elizabeth. If you take your cursor down to the bottom and click on the blue icon for Zoom, you'll have your screen back again.
Thank you very much. Okay, Wilbur, did that speak to some of your questions, or did I miss that?
And while we're waiting for Wilbur to respond, there's a comment from Paul Thornley. This is a great choice to reinforce the, I don't know how to say that word, anti-spiratory effects of dynamic stability prior to encouraging thoracic mobility without compressing or compromising structural integrity. Compromising, I think that means. Do you want me to keep reading, Elizabeth, or do you want to move on?
No, thank you. I think we should go back to Rachel at this point.
Okay. Just a reply from Wilbur, who says, thanks, Liz, it helps.
Bless him. Thanks.
I think a little bit too, having done that move for a long time now, I think what you already said well, but just in simple terms, that it's a movement that really makes clear that the push-pull need to be well balanced. If you don't balance them well, you end up on your nose. And often it's also quite an aha, I think, going from the diagonal pair having ground force to the same side, which can often be quite a surprise in how difficult it can be to find that balance when you first start to try that. And from there, all kinds of exploration ensue, I think. So from moving on from here, biotensegrity is a complex field of study. We find that many people make assumptions based on incomplete understanding. Those of us in this community want to learn more. We want to gain a clarity of understanding and are invested in speaking about and applying biotensegrity to our given craft with integrity and some measure of confidence. As a movement pioneer, can you speak to this?
Yes. I take the responsibility very seriously. And the responsibility of meaning I'm privileged to have to be an educator in the Pilates environment. and to be an increasingly maybe an educator in the fascia in motion environment. That it's a great responsibility to quote to want to get it right, and by that I mean to have a great respect for the specificity of language, and a great respect for the importance of choosing metaphors carefully. It's my experience that memes pass readily, are shared readily in movement practice environments. You know, in yoga classes, in Pilates classes, in gyrokinesis classes, because the instructor has a pulpit, so to speak. The instructor has a platform, and they are just doing their best to convey in language what is essentially a nonverbal experience. Consequently, the language just gets butchered. So, you know, I'll be walking through the studio and I'll hear the instructor say, "Oh, it's like this," and I want to turn around and say, "It is not like that."
Amen, amen. Yeah.
I know. So I always keep an editor on my shoulder, and she is always saying, "Really? You think that's right? Well, you better look that up. You better see what Stephen Levin had to say about that in the Biotensegrity Interest Group meeting." So if I'm stammering, that's because I'm listening to the voices in my head saying, "Don't get this wrong, because someone's going to put it on YouTube tomorrow and quote you," and then the whole, you know, then we're instead of contributing to the evolution of movement and intellectual integrity, we're just mashing the pablum, and I'm fierce about that. Don't do that.
Yeah, and I think you speak to a conundrum a lot of us are in, and I think maybe from the little bit I've seen and heard as well, that the you know, the big wigs per se in the community are in that conundrum themselves, in a way, trying to find a consistent vocabulary for a new paradigm. I think for those of us, especially like you're saying in movement, that are trying to convey right now in our world only through verbal cueing, because we've lost our touch cueing, in the most integral way we can, these new concepts, that can be a very big challenge. So I appreciate what you're saying there.
That's said, Rachel.
Yeah.
Really important to bring it to the what you just said, to bring that challenge to the movement and manual therapy too, but the movement educator community now, that we must be, in order to be effective, we must be more precise with our words. And if we're listening to what we say and really paying attention, it's appropriate to be at a loss for words, because I often say to my students, the fact that you did what I said indicates that I did not say what I meant.
Right. Always a conundrum. I know I find myself trying to say what I want with my hands and my body because it's going much faster than my brain to my mouth can figure out what I'm trying to convey. I think a lot of us find that. And that leads me into another beautiful segue, I think, in terms of how has the awareness or study of biotensegrity changed, shaped, and/or informed your practice in terms of working with clients, in terms of word choice, in terms of integration of words and touch, or now it would be helping to cue the client particularly into maybe their own touch sense to help them, let's say with proprioception or a felt sense guide for what they're looking for. I don't know if that was too many questions to throw at you at once there.
It's just fine. If I chose movement vocabulary and cued what I know for certain, then there would be no evolution, because I would just be repeating things I learned in the 80s that are hardwired in my nervous system, and I'm not interested in that. So it's quite the challenge to do one's best, to do my best to teach a movement class or a group of people or an individual client, to work with an individual client who has a health or movement challenge. It's quite a tightrope to walk, about recognizing that I don't know, that I'm in the void also, but doing my best to credit to what I have been taught, and doing my best to appreciate, to observe, and to be present with the person, the client who's in front of me. The approach that I take to this is to frequently ask the client for feedback. I mean, I watch intently, watch how their eyes change, watch how the expression of their mouth changes, looking for indications of experiences that may not have made it to the verbal cortex. And then I also ask open-ended questions. If the client says, wow, I didn't know this difference between my left shoulder and my right shoulder. Instead of going, yeah, I knew that already. Just look how high it is. Instead, I would just say, oh, would you say more about that? So that would be an open-ended question to encourage. And that has two benefits, I hope. One is that it gets the client more involved in their interoceptive experience. And two, when the client says more about that, then that may shed light on an aspect of this movement function or dysfunction that had never occurred to me. So
yes,
an example,
absolutely.
I think. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. So looking at the time, I think for anyone who's going to have to leave on the hour, we just have some things we need to get out there. And then hopefully for anybody who would like to continue past then, we can pick up with this thread and move on from there. Mm-hmm. Chris, Graham, Susan, take it away.
Can I just say a little point, Elizabeth, as I agree entirely about the vocabulary, particularly with relation to biotensegrity, because we're looking at the body in a completely different way than we were doing 50 years ago. We don't consider the body as built with a bone stacked on top of one another like a pile of bricks. But we've all been taught that. We've all been told that. And getting rid of the old stuff to allow the new stuff in, which is actually much simpler than we give it credit for, but we're just full of the old stuff, which is difficult to get rid of. So we're all in this together, finding new ways new ways of explaining things. Yes, I think it's might be an opportunity now to open it up to bigger audience. Questions from the floor. Would you agree with that, Rachel?
Yes, absolutely. Sounds wonderful.
So while we, oh, there's a new message down here. While we wait for people to type their questions into the chat, there's one here. Thanks for sharing, Elizabeth. I love hearing about your journey. This was way at the beginning and the shifts that are happening. It seems that many people who understand fascia do not realize that they're limited in their understanding of biotensegrity. This came out when you were sharing that part about your own history. What, in your opinion, can we do to encourage people to move past these limitations and learn more about biotensegrity, to avoid that kind of, I know what I'm talking about, when they actually don't know what they don't know?
Yes. Well, I think one could develop movement experiences that are high novelty and low risk, such as being on all threes with your foot on the wall. Because, you know, as Rachel said, you know, if you don't balance your forces of tension and compression, you'll be face down. So, so there.
Yeah, right along those lines, also from the chat, from YouTube, I hope I pronounced the last name correctly. Peter Spots is saying, to me, the movement practice was pretty subtle and awareness building. I liked focusing on the ground force points. And I can say from all my experience in your vocabulary, I often hear that, oh, this is so subtle, or almost sometimes feels like I'm doing nothing, I think in comparison to what people are kind of used to thinking they should feel about working out. And yet then often they're very surprised about all of the feedback that they get from their being about everything that actually was happening. There's always a lot, no matter what, inside the body, I think.
Rachel, two points to there. There's a great benefit to being injured or to feeling not well. In that case, or in those cases, what one used to do may no longer be available or may no longer feel good. And the search for health or balance through subtlety sometimes is a benefit there. So. Yes,
absolutely. I know I experienced that with my clients, very much so. In what I see, I don't know if I'm articulating this well or get from them, is often if we very gently remind their tissues of connections, it's like it wakes the system back up again, and they're able to find a better balance and a better function from things I think people might consider, you know, like watching paint dry, but there's really a lot going on there.
More to the person who spoke about the ground forces. I said push your hand into the ground. When you practice this, additionally, when you practice this further, make a distinction between whether you press into the little finger side of the heel of your hand, which will put a force more through the lateral aspect of the arm and the lateral border of the scapula, or whether you press into the thumb side of your hand, which will have a different transfer of force through the neuromyofascial system, more up and to the pectoral area. So there's more detail where this came from.
Yes, absolutely. Let me scroll because Carol M. Davis has made a comment in the chat. The brain knows nothing of muscle, only movement. Metaphor is such a powerful visualization tool if used accurately and with good timing.
And Carol is the master of that.
I'm scrolling. Does anybody else, Graham, Chris, Susan, see any other questions popping up in the chat as of now?
There was one that, but I've just checked on because I wasn't sure of some of the words. So when they get back to me, I can bring it in. But
there's one here from Connie. Do you see it? Do you want me to read it?
Go ahead, Chris.
She says, in your vocabulary, do you have open-ended inquiries?
I would say yes. Listen.
I would be interested, Elizabeth. We have a couple minutes before we do our roundup and then open up to the mix and mingle. And I'd be interested to hear, you did talk about the importance of translating the theory, things that we get from, and first principles into movement. Now you've written this book and I understand that you have these years of practice. And are there key points in this book that we can dive into to help with that question in our own practices or as teachers?
Oh, in the Fascia in Motion book?
Yeah. Are there key points that you would say, hey, okay, chapter such and such, start there?
Yes. The as an instrument of shuttle diplomacy, this book alternates one chapter on Joseph H. Pilates movement vocabulary from a fascia-focused perspective, followed by the next chapter is fascia-focused movement. So it alternates the Pilates vocabulary and then fascia-focused vocabulary, Pilates vocabulary and fascia-focused vocabulary. So every other chapter intends to embody some biotensegral principles. That's my intention. However, I didn't have the intellectual background to be able to frame it in that, to advertise it in that way. So you can find vocabulary in every other chapter in alternating chapters in the book. Some mat with props, some with all the different pieces of Pilates apparatus that embody the balance of tension and discontinuous compression and continuous tension, and that also require the radial transmission of force rather than the linear transmission of force.
Right, so thank you. So not only do we see this juxtaposition of, the Pilates, which was from traditional, or which
Right.
was from this one, and then we see your translation and then can explore that to find out how it translates in our own body. And then whenever the next book is coming up, we see the next grow through this because it's an ongoing journey.
Well,
I don't know if you have a next book, but.
Next books, I think that would be Susan's, right? Susan's book is coming up pretty shortly from Handspring.
Yes, and
yeah,
are you there, Susan?
I am here. Thank you. Yeah. We don't, because everything's going crazy right now in the entire world, everything from, my guess is, paper supplies on huge ships to what's going on in warehouses. Who knows exactly what happens with these timelines, but thanks for mentioning it. Can I also, while I'm here, somebody was asking Elizabeth about the quote from Graham's book. Was it the first or second edition, and what was the page?
It's the second edition. Lots more color in the second edition and lots more facts. It's page 130, chapter 11, on the very bottom paragraph on page 130. And while I have your attention, I'll just read from page 131, which is also relevant to us. Hands-on practitioners have long considered the human body to be a functionally integrated unit, even before tensegrity was discovered, and an innumerable number of successful treatments based on the old lever model have been performed. the value of biotensegrity is not that it necessarily changes a particular mode of treatment, but that it provides a better means to visualize the workings of the body in the light of new understandings about functional anatomy, a rational approach to biomechanics.
Great.
There is a question, actually Pilates focused question I think is very interesting here from Drew Riccardi. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the time, and so can we do the transition? So we like to thank all of our sponsors and everybody, and then on the hour we open up to the mix and mingle. And that's a great time to continue those questions. So sorry for cutting you off. Graham?
No, please.
Sorry.
Graham, do you want to do the outro and thanks to Handspring and such?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, I want to thank Handspring for providing a discount on the purchase of their books, which is available by going onto the Biotensegrity Archive website and joining the newsletter, and then you can have this very important, very generous discount for their books. I want also to thank all the sponsors of this meeting, which is the Stephen Levin Biotensegrity Archive and Embodied Biotensegrity, as well as Handspring. So, Chris.
And thanks to Elizabeth and Rachel. This is the first time that we've had a guest host, so that was exciting for us. And Elizabeth, I think that you just bring something so different to the table than what we've had in the previous weeks, and that we just all these different voices in the field. So I really feel privileged that you were able to be here with us today. And what do we have on for next week, Chris?
Next week, we have Joanne Avison with her book, which I could go and grab. You can say the title, Yoga, Fascia, Movement.
And for those of you who
Elizabeth
may,
could grab it. It's right behind her
Great.
there. And then after that, I think we have Susan's upcoming book. Oh, no, we don't. We have Super Stability. And then the week after that, we have Susan.
yeah, so we're going to do something a little different in a couple of weeks. We're going to have a panel with different people. It might just be Leonid. We're not sure yet, but we'll figure it out as we go. You know, we're improvising this whole thing. And so that should be.
Leonid will just bring all his voices. Leonid has many voices. He can bring them all.
He's a panel within himself, right? And then during the week of the British Fascia Symposium, I think we're going to be on break because people will be, what we're thinking of doing is just having a social hour and not having a specific author, so that we can still have our party, but we know a lot of people will be involved with the British Fascia Symposium. But keep posted. Again, we're in flex. And for those of you who made comments or questions and we didn't get to them in the hour, hang out with us as long as you're able, and we'll see if we can get more covered. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you have time to stick around, but we'd love to have you if you do.
Great, thank you.
Great. And Elizabeth, are you able to take a question from Joe before she has to move on?
Love to, but let's just put Joe's book up.
Okay.
One more time.
Just thank you, Elizabeth. That's so sweet of you. Thank you for that beautiful presentation. And I just wanted to ask a question. I'm so sorry, I have to go. There's a family thing that was at 7, so I've asked them to crave my indulgence. There was I should have done my homework and got this guy, but you've inspired me with a question that I haven't had time to look up. I know you're very familiar with deep academic and physical in-action progress in many fields of movement, which is evident and lovely that we saw today. And one of the issues that you showed such beautiful and elegant curiosity over is the language that we use in biotensegrity. And what I wanted to ask you about was the use of pedagogic tools and how you explain them. Because I was listening recently, he's a doctor of physics and he's in Feldenkrais, and he was being put out by the Alexander Technique teachers as a video, and I can't remember his name, but you might be familiar with him. And like many people, he was using one of Tom Fleming's Tensegrities and claiming that biotensegrity doesn't work because it's in an inadequate presentation of the muscles and the bones, i.e. the standard misunderstanding that the wooden rods represent bones and the elastic bands represent muscles and tissues, and therefore we're all a bunch of idiots because we're stupid enough to think that that will teach people how to move better. I'm obviously criticizing, which I probably shouldn't, but it's also nonsense because we're not that stupid. So I just wonder, because it does leave a question that, you know, I've also been in a classroom where I have meticulously explained what it means, and then, like you, have overheard another teacher explain to someone else from where they are and got into such a muddle. Like you, I just end up going, oh my God, did I say that? Did I say that? And you end up tripping over your own words trying to find them. So I was wondering what you do, and I completely appreciate that you refer back and forth to the client's physical experience. I wonder how you address the question of pedagogic tools.
Right.
Well, it's a big question, I appreciate.
As fascinated as I am in developing my own understanding or ability to use biotensegrity vocabulary and concepts accurately and with integrity, as fascinated as I am with that, I'm shocked to find that my clients do not share this fascination. My clients are just like, whatever, you know, but they just want to feel that they can move well and move better and get on with their movement session. So when a client says, oh, I just noticed that when I push through my left heel, my right shoulder feels better. And I'm like, yes, did you know that on this page in Joanne's book, it says, it explains why auxetic principles of tissues, and the clients are like, get over it, just move on. So I make a distinction, Joanne, between my effectiveness in working with the client and my ability to be a student in biotensegrity meetings.
And what about when you're teaching movement to teachers? I'm really fascinated, and I'd ask it of everybody if I'd had time. And I didn't use the word auxetic because, like you, I'm learning, and I didn't know it when I wrote that book, but thank you.
Right. Well, I'm fortunate now that the Pilates community tends to revere people who are older. That's not always the case in our communities, and in my case, people are probably thinking to themselves, "Oh my God, she's still around." Meaning that she was making videos in the 80s, and now she's still teaching. So I can use the pulpit of the fact that I'm still here and still evolving and still working to model for my students the importance of being humble and keeping an editor on your shoulder. So I use the tools by saying, currently it's my best understanding that this particular move could be framed as an experience of balancing a variety of forces. However, I'm not too sure of myself, so just make sure that you don't get overconfident. That's how I frame it.
Thank you for answering that.
I think maybe now would be a good time to go back to the question I was talking about before, which is a Pilates specific question, but I think the answer is far-reaching or might be far-reaching. The question is from Drew. I hope I don't butcher this. Riccardi. And the question is, do you think Joe Pilates had more understanding of biotensegrity / primal movement, as opposed to how I learned it, he or she, learned it classically through Ramana's interpretation in the late 90s? The dancer take on the method feels so fragmented in my body. That's an interesting question, I think.
Yes, it is. And first of all, I'll just state that I don't channel anybody. It's bad for your energy field to channel anybody. And I for sure don't channel Joseph Pilates. So I don't know what he was thinking because I did not ever have the opportunity to study with him. If that opportunity was available, I missed it. He passed away in 1967, and I didn't come to Pilates until much later. I do have tremendous respect for and admiration for Joseph Pilates' genius as a mover. And I recognize that whenever I learn from somebody, whether they're teaching their own stuff or someone else's movement vocabulary, that they're always filtering it, because we are filters. So I would, I imagine that the integrity, that the kinesthetic integrity and the balance of forces that Joseph Pilates embodied may have been fragmented in transmission by anyone who's teaching, although each of us are doing the best we can.
Thank you. Edward had his hand up, and so does Wilbur, so does Anastasia, yeah? Or is that just to demonstrate that you can put the hand up? So Anastasia has told me that there's a hands up button here. It's under your more, and I'm hoping that it gives me a chronological order. But meanwhile, Edward, I see you've had your hand up for a while, and then next would be Wilbur.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for your presentation. And I was looking at the chat room. I have two lines of questions here. One is, I've worked with Patrick Johnson and Tim Cacciatore, the Alexander teachers, and Patrick is trained as a physicist. And I've heard his arguments about biotensegrity, and to me, they just don't hold up. They don't make any sense. He makes assumptions that, to me, don't apply to the living body, to the soma. And we're all working so diligently to try to understand something that's so immensely complex. So, I appreciate your humility, Elizabeth. The other line of questioning, and Carol, I don't know you at all. And although I come from an Alexander technique background, I certainly I'm not wedded to FM Alexander. He got a lot of things wrong too. But your notion about, I wonder if you could say something more about the mind or the brain doesn't know anything about muscle. Carol?
Carol, you can unmute yourself.
Well, the brain studies show that we see the homunculus in the somatosensory cortex, and we get a great big picture of the tongue because of all the sensation from the tongue and so forth. And we have an idea that if we say, for example, if Elizabeth were working with someone on a reformer, if you would straighten your knee down, make your quadriceps much stiffer, That the brain doesn't know about a quadriceps, but if she would use metaphor, as I've heard so many wonderful Pilates teachers do, can you make your legs be like trees in the wind? The wind is blowing against the tree and the tree is standing straight. And you make your legs straight like a straight tree in the wind. Or lift your arms up or as if you. The brain, then you visualize. Your brain goes to a picture. And then your body follows suit with what you perceive that would feel like in your body, rather than where is my quadriceps? What's the origin and insertion? If I have to tighten my quadriceps, what happens to my hamstrings? You know, that's just that there's no place for that in movement education as far as I'm concerned. And for the Pilates instructors that I've worked with, some of them are masters at metaphor, and I've benefited from it tremendously.
Yeah, I see a lot of the movers and dancers I know here giving that a big thumbs up.
And I'm going to say one of whom is Anastasi, who's one of my contributors. Thanks for being here, Anastasi. Steve also is one of my contributors to my book, and so is Ed. And it's just nice to have you all here. So I want to say thank you for your support once again. And if I've missed anybody, I'm sorry. I think we've got other questions in the chat too. Go ahead. Chris, you're in charge of that.
Am I in charge? Okay, I think Wilbur was next. You can unmute yourself, Wilbur, I believe, or do you want me to do it for you?
Okay, here I go. Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's like, for me, I mean, I've heard this story, but listening to you again, it's like listening to my favorite songs from Aretha Franklin, you know?
Wow.
Wonderful. Your journey is incredible. And I think as a practitioner, you have expressed the real humbleness of wanting to evolve, because I remember we met so many years ago in Ohm, and we all trying to learn from this stuff and trying to be very particular and careful as to how we interpret things. And I think I really respect you for that, because you've shown that. I've seen you shown that sort of cautiousness and particularness and asking the interesting questions. And I have to pay homage to you, you know, for your architecture of maneuvering your learning knowledge. I admire that, and I take some of that for myself. With that said, I think you've made some very interesting points, and we've had lots of discussion about Pilates. One of the things a comment I want to make is that movement, any type of movement, the body is meant for movement, otherwise we don't survive. We're designed for movement, and we are designed our body is designed that it has to work together. And the comment that Edward just made, which is very interesting, and I agree with your first comment, Edward, is that nothing works by itself. And even going back to what Joan says, that the physicist who talked about, you know, biotensegrity don't make sense, I think he don't understand physics. Because if you talk to the physicists, the theoretical physicists who talk about, we are made up of protons and electrons. And a proton by itself don't mean shit. It can't do anything without an electron. And these hierarchical systems transfer themselves into our being. We are made up of protons and electrons, right? And if we talk about consciousness, a proton by itself can't do anything about consciousness. But if you put a proton and electron together, we have this thing called our brain, and this is where consciousness comes from. So hierarchical systems does seem to be something about nature. And Graham talks about that in his books, and it goes way back to the basic electron proton concept in terms of theoretical physics.
Mm.
The other comment I want to make is about movement in terms of how does movement how do we design movement when we're looking after pain and dysfunction? And this is something that I think that where Pilates have to really start evolving, because I think it's a beautiful practice, but really have to, when people are presenting with pain and dysfunction, how does this movement sort of blend into what we're trying to rectify? Because a lot of time we get one size fits all thing and we don't really, I think, target what's important. So I think as practitioners, we have to really pay particular attention to how we use the principles of tensegrity and fascia to help rectify or better the dysfunction or whatever is going on within our system, to recreate the balance that makes us feel free and movable. You know, so, and one more thing is that, as you said, which again is your humbleness, Elizabeth, we talk about not dishing anybody what Joe Pilates did and so forth. This is so important because these forefathers, Joe Pilates, Andrew Stills, B.B. Palmer about chiropractic, these are forefathers who've given us a platform, a building block to allow us to go and recreate stuff. And I mean, basically what we're doing with biotensegrity and with fascia, we're just trying to understand and find reasons for why things we used to do that used to work before works. Some of these things have been working for years, we never understood, but now we can understand, we can become more creative, we can become more artistic in our delivery because we have better understanding. And 20, 30 years from now, our children will have better understanding. So I wish you all the best. I have to go back to practice, but thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for Susan and Chris and everybody, and Graham and Steve and everybody who's there, and Elizabeth for your presentation and your partner there in your presentation. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Wilbur.
Thanks, Wilbur. See you next
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
I don't know who's next. Anybody?
It's
with their hand up?
Anastasi. I think he's had his hand up a while.
Anastasia, you're there. We go.
Okay. Well, I was really just trying to demonstrate the raise hand function, but since I've got the floor,
Sorry.
I want to, and going on from what the current topic has been, this idea that no muscle works alone, no muscles represented individually in our brain. Yeah, I think Feldenkrais, as Elizabeth knows, was all, and this is what I wrote in Susan's book, so it's all very tying together in a way. The idea that we move in patterns and muscle synergies are really the nature of how we organize movement. And you know, Feldenkrais utilized that and said, you know, thinking in patterns is really his way of bringing about change. And so I was just wondering, Elizabeth, since you talked about Joe a lot, and I know that you studied Feldenkrais, maybe would you say something about how Feldenkrais has played into your current understanding of biotensegrity and the work that you've developed?
Yes, thank you for that, because it was an omission in one of the earlier answers to Rachel's great questions. After I had worked for maybe 5 years as a Pilates dance medicine specialist at St. Francis Hospital, I recognized that the vocabulary, the education that I had received was inadequate to address the multitude of different diagnoses or different conditions that were presented at Center for Sports and Dance Medicine. We started with professional dancers, and then to more dancers in training, and then to athletes, and then to eventually our practice consisted a great deal of people with chronic pain or with traumatic brain injury. It was quite the gamut, quite the spectrum there. And I realized that the fairly narrow but comprehensive Pilates training I had was not sufficient. So I looked around to find what would suit my lifestyle, my learning style, and my resources at the time, and was fortunate that at that time Anat Banyel was still part of the Feldenkrais Guild, and Anat Banyel was holding her 4-year Feldenkrais training course just miles from my home. So I would attend the Feldenkrais training, and then I would do my late afternoon and early evening hours working as a dance medicine specialist at St. Francis Hospital. Now, this was great for integrating Feldenkrais into Pilates. It was probably not so fabulous for Feldenkrais immersion. So to this day, I look forward to having the opportunity to take the 4-year training again. Maybe with a different set of teachers, but you know. But anyway, it served me quite well because I would be immersed in the kinesthetic experience of the Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons and functional integration experiences. At the same time, I was learning the way that Moshe Feldenkrais would structure a lesson. And it's that overlay of, now I call it movement sequencing, but structuring a lesson which has a theme and variations. And don't just think you're going to do variation 1, 3, and 5. Oh, no, 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 no. You have to do all the variations, you know, an exhaustive experience, embodied experience of all the variations. And sure enough, one or a group of those variations will illuminate a kinesthetic blind spot, a place where not only does the fascial intelligence have no effing clue how to get there, but consequently the mind, the body map in the brain, which to Carol's point is not about muscles, doesn't know how to jump that synapse either. So the experience of the awareness through movement lessons brought me to be appreciative of the value of not knowing, and not knowing how to get from here to there, but giving instead a practice, a processing practice, so that when one goes slowly, like you know, and listens, and sort of, my vocabulary now, coaxes the fascia a little bit. So I learned tremendous amount, and would only be a better person if I spend more time in Feldenkrais work.
Thank you both. Anne Waite Gilmer is next with her hand up. Anne, are you there still?
Yes. Is it coming through?
Oh, I see you. Yes.
Okay. It was a question for Elizabeth. You've been teaching so much more and so much longer than I have. I started Pilates in '77, though, in New York with Robert Fitzgerald. At that time, very, very classical. Oh, he saved my dance career. The difference in how I teach and how he taught is night and day. I will still never forget the fact that that man was able to take anything I was given in a dance class in a ballet and tell me how to survive it, given all the injuries I had had. So I really appreciate the fact that you go back to our beginnings and who taught us. And although it may have evolved, even what Wilbur said, that to negate what our ancestors did in these domains, we've changed tremendously. Mine came about as an evolution, I know, through things just not working in the old classical method for me. I was teaching it because I was so dedicated to my teachers. And I kept looking at people and saying, that's just not working, until I started allowing myself to change certain practices. And then I had the good fortune to meet Joe Avison in 2006, which completely revolutionized everything I did. Going on to John Sharkey, but that notion that you can retain everything they started with and taught us and bring it into a different time. I remember Robert Fitzgerald telling me if Joe was alive now, he wouldn't do it the same way. You know, he was always open to changing. He changed even the form of a box or an arc based on somebody's new body. So I would assume these people would have evolved as well. And we're just lucky to take it into the future. Yours was one of the classes I took a very long time ago that I had to go, we're not in Kansas anymore. Because I had such a hard time moving out of classical into neutral. And I grit my teeth and everything. And every bit of the way I kept going, this makes sense. And I know for me, what I had such a hard time evolving through was it made me think everything I had done was wrong. And it's the ego not wanting to think that you'd done something wrong. So as soon as I could let go of that, you know, it evolved. But I do appreciate Wilbur's remarks, your remarks, and the capacity to bring it forward. And that's also part of the teachers that I hear on this every week. To let them show their humbleness, their vulnerability, when I'm still lost and muddled in everything they keep talking about, is reassuring. And it lets us all know we can keep learning. Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Any other questions, comments? Oh, is that Bonnie? You're waving your hand? I think Bonnie Massaro is waving her hand. Bonnie, I'm going to unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everybody. This was very interesting. I love the movement that you did. I love the pace of it. Something you mentioned was about traumatic brain injury, which I've had one, and coming back from it and understanding how to make your body move was quite a treat within itself. And seeing the way that you are focused in your moving, that is something I'm very interested in. But with that being said, I'm coming to the group from a place of injury. So I came from the world of injury and to try to transform what would be abnormal flow in the body to the normal. So injury to non-injury. And I have been following along with Joanne and Graham and John and this whole crew. And what I have found is prior to coming, I found some touch healing that I figured out just by exploring the anatomy in my own way. But from coming to this group, I realized that when Wilbur says that we have this opportunity or almost, you know, this ability and responsibility even to take this further. And so one thing that I have liked to suggest, I'm feeling kind of shy saying all this right now, but is how great would it be if somebody could teach, you know, someone in the movement and like the Pilates or the yoga, some of your moves, and then someone like me who can understand in that movement where if somebody is injured in that area, what are the things you can do with some gentle touch, massage within a movement, especially with yoga. I don't know either. I've been picking up yoga a little bit because of Chris. She gets me so excited about it. So just simple little movements where you're in that movement, you can do very minimal touch or teach your, I call it patient, but client, student, you know, how to touch that one area. And then when they go home, they can actually work out that, you know, not or abnormal piece themselves at some pace that's very slow and gentle. So I think that what Wilbur had mentioned was the idea that if we take these different minds and the different, you know, divisions that we're all coming from, but we're all coming into the same space of reality, and we can, you know, cross over our knowledge to each other and help each other understand how we can take each one of our fields even further. Thank you all.
Yeah, that was so well articulated. So beautiful to hear you speak, and thank you very much for being outside in the garden. Great. Yeah, nice.
I'm actually in lockdown at my son's house in an RV. This is my yard. I'm in the side of the driveway. So not quite a garden.
Well, it certainly works for us. And the format that you describe is very doable, very possible. It's a different format than the Biotensegritea lecture socializing hour, but perhaps in a discussion with the organizers of Biotensegritea, perhaps we could find a way to have a session that would be more similar to what you envision.
I think a lot of people have an interest in that. I know that I certainly do. And in my own practice, I work hard and try to find the dance and the integration between manual and movement concepts, whether that's using soft props or touch or anything. So I think a lot of us have an interest in that intersection as well, and how to put that best to use in any given situation.
Can we also, Marie Marguerite, can you unmute yourself? Because I think you made a nice comment in the chat and I'd love you to share it.
Yes, of course. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I was saying that I love the idea of inviting the exploration to illuminate a kinesthetic blind spot. I love that aspect.
I like that way you put it, a kinesthetic blind spot.
Elizabeth was mentioning that. And,
I missed it. Sorry, Elizabeth.
And I find that aspect, looking through that lens, very interesting.
It's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
How are we fixed for time?
I think we're getting ready to, depending on where we are, call it a morning, call it an afternoon, call it a night.
Yeah.
Great seeing everyone. Oh, Summer? Go ahead.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, Summer. Oh. We've got, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. I just had a question, like the technique that you showed us, how would you show somebody with a really bad back how to do that? Like I'll give you an example. I should stop saying I have a bad back, but I do. I had a recurrent injury of my back just a week ago. And I tried to do the movement and I kept falling on my face. Basically, I couldn't integrate my leg with my foot, with my hand, and I know I need to do that. So I was wondering, how would you teach someone like me? How would you start with someone like me?
Yes. Summer, thank you for that. And I trust that in your efforts to try to do that, you did not harm your tissues further.
Yeah, I was careful.
Because of you, that's excellent. In the movement sequence that we practiced together with one foot on the wall that's not the beginning of the sequence. I had to choose just one movement that was high novelty, relatively low risk, but that would get everybody's attention. Clearly, that is not the place to start in your current experience, in your current configuration. And then it's a whole, it's a multitude of complex interactions between you and your teacher, or you and your therapist, or you and your osteopath, or you and your something. that will can help to restore. Oh, where's Graham's book? What are we doing? That will facilitate. There's a quote here somewhere. That will facilitate the body's self-organizing mechanisms can then automatically respond. So if we were to stay in the subject of the tensegrity, if we were to stay in the realm of biotensegrity, we'd be repairing finding movement and manual work that by changing tissue tensions, repairing the structure or improving mobility, that would alter the tissue geometry, changing the architecture and the body's self-organizing mechanisms. But so I know that's lots of theory, and then each practitioner would do their best in order to facilitate your well-being.
Now I have a question. I'm going to follow up, Elizabeth. I'm going to ask you, for somebody who doesn't have the benefit of that right now, but wants to play with that, could we like put our belly on a stool, you see what I mean, and lie down, you know what I mean, and be in a supported position and make the shape? Or would there be any benefit to that?
Susan, I do follow you, and that would be an example of taking what I showed too literally.
Thank you.
If we were to take a page from the Moshe Feldenkrais playbook, we would go, oh, get out of quadruped, get on your side. And then you see there would be an awareness through movement lesson for organizing on your side, which would facilitate a similar or related function, but in a different relationship to gravity. Now, for those of you who are, who are going to kill yourself trying to do that move on all threes, let me just save you from yourselves and suggest that you could go to, I know, you see, I take what I do so seriously, and I'm either like crying about it because I'm overwhelmed with emotion, or I'm super serious. But that's no fun at all. So I just try to make jokes to recognize that it's all tongue in cheek. Like, how ridiculous is this? So those of you who are looking for other movement material that's related to that, please go to Pilates anytime. Use my last name, L-A-R-K-A-M, Larkam, for your code for a 30-day free trial. And then look for the mat exercises, no props, just the mat lessons, no props. And you will find movements on your side that are, always credit your sources. I always credit my sources to appreciate the Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons, even though I'm not teaching Feldenkrais, I'm doing it in the context of Pilates and fascia-focused movement. So, Susan, do not build an edifice so you can do that on all fours. Just save yourself.
Elizabeth, just to follow up, I actually wanted to tell you that intuitively, I found myself just to help myself feel better. I found myself getting on my side, and actually not today, but I did it a couple of days ago. I was on my side and pushing against the wall, and then trying to do some rotational motion with my arm.
Yes.
And sometimes I would feel like today, the only way that I could release some of that restriction was actually to go, even in standing, to go into an unwinding position where I actually compressed it. I felt better with compressing the area. And I know Carol is smiling because she can relate to that. I found that compression worked so much better to release it, and I felt so much better since the morning, you know. And it's really what worked for me the best is compressing it.
That's wonderful news that your enhanced sense of proprioception and interoception are leading you in the right direction. But please don't suffer alone. Find a very skilled clinician, an osteopath, a manual therapist, someone who has very good clinical skills who can be your partner in this, because life is too, even though it's our calling, life is too short to figure it all out on your own.
Yep.
Get some help.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I'd like to interject here and thank Elizabeth Larkam for being our guest speaker, and to Rachel Tudor for doing the interviews. Also to Chris Clancy and Susan Levin for helping to organise this, and emphasise the thanks to sponsors, Stephen Levin, Biotensegrity Archive, Embodied by Tensegrity, and Handspring Publishing. And if you're still watching on YouTube and you haven't signed up for the Biotensegrity Archive newsletter, just let you know that Handspring are offering a generous discount to those people who sign up for any of their books. So I think we're almost done.
One
here.
more thank you, and that is to you, Graham.
Oh, well, thank you, Chris.
For all that you're doing for this community, for emceeing, and for being part of this team that brings the BiotensegriTea Party to everybody. It's been fun.
Yeah.
And
thank you to everybody who's participated in this too.
Yeah, it's been great and wonderful to listen to you speak, Elizabeth. We've sat next to each other at the big and last fall. We've stood next to each other at Biotensegrity Canada, and this is such a beautiful opportunity to hear how you're integrating all of this, and I really appreciate it. And need to go back now and watch when I can focus on it. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Rachel.
I want to thank all of you as well, Chris, Elizabeth, Susan, Graham, especially for your vote of confidence in me. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next week.